The conference room door slammed behind me. I heard it echo through the office like a gavel coming down on a verdict. My boss, Harrison, had just slid the Meridian contract across the polished table. Not to me. To his favorite team. My name didn't even get mentioned. I stood there watching it happen, frozen in that moment where your brain is trying to catch up with reality. My hands were shaking. My vision blurred. I could feel the heat spreading across my face, that awful combination of fury and humiliation that makes you feel like you're burning from the inside out. What the hell just happened? I whispered to myself as I walked back to my desk. My name is Chloe Jones. I'd spent 6 months building that client relationship from nothing. 6 months of late nights, weekend calls, strategy sessions, personal check-ins. The Meridian account was supposed to be my biggest professional win. It was supposed to prove I could close deals at the level everyone said I couldn't reach. Instead, it became the moment everything changed. I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen, not really seeing anything. My coffee cup was trembling in my hand. I set it down before I spilled it all over my keyboard. Around me, the office buzzed with congratulations for Harrison's team. I could hear them laughing, celebrating. Nobody looked at me. Nobody acknowledged the 6 months of work I'd poured into this account. That was when I understood something fundamental about the world. Competence doesn't matter if someone else gets the credit. Loyalty doesn't matter if your boss doesn't see you. Hard work doesn't matter if the decision's already made. And I made a choice right there. I was done being invisible. I excused myself and stepped out of the office. The bathroom was empty, thank God. I locked myself in a stall and just breathed for a minute. My reflection in the mirror looked like someone had slapped me. Red face. Wide eyes. The expression of someone who'd just been publicly betrayed. I splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself again. This was the moment. This was the exact moment where I could either cry about it or do something about it. I chose to do something about it. I'd spent my entire career playing it safe. Following the rules. Waiting my turn. Doing exactly what I was supposed to do and hoping someone would notice. Well, someone noticed. Harrison noticed that I was good enough to do his work. Just not good enough to get credit for it. The anger I felt wasn't the emotional kind that fades. It was cold. Clinical. Like someone had flipped a switch inside me from passive to active. I went back to my desk and I didn't say anything to anybody. I didn't confront Harrison. I didn't blow up on social media. I didn't even tell anyone how I felt. I just sat there and I started taking notes. Every single thing I'd done for the Meridian account. Every proposal I'd written. Every problem I'd solved. Every email I'd sent. Every call I'd made. I printed out everything. All of it. I organized it chronologically. And I put it in a folder labeled documentation. Because I understood something that most people don't understand until it's too late. Evidence matters. Documentation matters. When you have proof, you have power. And I was going to build myself some power. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the entire evening going through my email history with Meridian. 6 months of communication. 6 months of problem solving. 6 months of me being the one they could count on. I read through every single exchange. I saw the patterns. I saw how many times their founder, Cassandra, had specifically asked for me. I saw how many times she'd said things like, "Chloe really understands what we need." I saw how many times she'd trusted me with sensitive information about their business. Harrison had stolen a relationship that I'd built. He'd stolen it because he could. Because he had the title and the position to do it. But he didn't have the relationship. That was the thing he didn't understand. Cassandra trusted me. She didn't trust Harrison. She barely knew Harrison. He was just the guy in the title. I was the person who actually solved her problems. That distinction was going to matter. I opened a new document on my personal laptop. I started cataloging everything. Not just the work I'd done, but the specific problems I'd solved. The specific times when Meridian had come to me with an issue and I'd fixed it. The specific moments when they'd expressed trust in me over anyone else. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calculating. I could feel the shift happening inside me. From victim to strategist. From passive to active. That night, I also did something else. I created an encrypted folder with copies of all the documentation. Not because I was planning to leak anything, but because I was planning to build a case. And cases require evidence. The next morning, I came in like nothing had happened. I was calm. Collected. I didn't avoid anyone. I didn't act bitter. I just showed up and did my job. The difference was that now I was doing my job with complete clarity about what I was actually doing. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't trying to prove myself to anyone. I was building a foundation. Brick by brick. Detail by detail. During the morning stand-up meeting, Harrison announced that his team would be handling the Meridian account directly. He explained that he wanted to free me up to focus on other client work. The message was clear to everyone in that room. I was being sidelined. I was being sent a message. But I nodded like it was fine. Like it didn't bother me. Inside, I was thinking about the next 6 weeks. I was thinking about how I was going to turn this humiliation into an advantage. I wasn't going to fight Harrison directly. That would be stupid. He had the authority. He had the position. He had the title. What he didn't have was the relationship with Meridian. That was my advantage. And I was going to use it. That first week, I played it perfectly calm. I responded to client emails professionally. I did the work I was assigned. I didn't reach out to Meridian. I didn't try to interfere with Harrison's team. I just waited. Because I knew something about how business actually works. If Harrison's team couldn't deliver the same level of service I had been delivering, Meridian would notice. And they would eventually reach out to me. That's just human nature. People work with people they trust. People trust people who solve their problems. Cassandra trusted me. She didn't trust Harrison. That gap was going to matter. By Wednesday of that first week, I got an email from Cassandra. It was casual. Professional. But the message underneath was clear. She was asking a question about her account that Harrison's team had already handled. She was reaching out to me anyway. She was testing to see if I was still around. I responded within 2 hours. I was warm. Professional. Helpful. I didn't mention what had happened. I didn't complain. I just solved her problem the way I always had. She responded with a simple message, "You're still the best." That was the moment I knew this was going to work. That was the moment I understood that I had already won. All that was left was the execution. I spent that weekend building my case file. I went through every single interaction with Meridian. I identified the key decision makers. I identified their pain points. I identified the specific problems I'd solved that made me invaluable to them. I created a detailed breakdown of what Harrison's team didn't know. They didn't know that Meridian's main concern was supply chain efficiency. They didn't know that Cassandra was under pressure from her board about quarterly costs. They didn't know that the company had 3 competitors circling for their market share. They didn't know any of this because I'd learned it through months of careful conversation. Through trust building. Through paying attention. I had institutional knowledge that Harrison's team simply didn't have. And more importantly, I had the relationships to implement that knowledge effectively. That's what made me dangerous. That's what they didn't realize they'd given away by putting me in a corner. By week 2, the problems started. Not obvious problems, but problems that Cassandra would notice. Harrison's team missed a deadline on a proposal revision. It wasn't major, but it was a break in the pattern I'd established. Cassandra emailed me directly asking if I knew why the delay had happened. I didn't throw Harrison under the bus. I explained it diplomatically. I said sometimes teams get busy. What I did was follow up immediately with a revised proposal that was even better than what I'd originally planned. I submitted it to her before Harrison's team even knew it was needed. She noticed. More importantly, her entire team noticed. They started copying me on emails that Harrison's team wasn't seeing. They started reaching out to me with questions that Harrison's team couldn't answer. The gap was widening. By week 3, I received another test email from Cassandra. This one was different. She was asking about a potential expansion of their account. A new product line they were considering. She was asking me specifically if I thought it would work. She wasn't asking Harrison. She was asking me. I responded with a detailed analysis. 15 pages. Charts. Projections. Risk assessment. Everything she needed to make an informed decision. I sent it from my personal email, not the company server. That was deliberate. I wanted her to understand something fundamental. This analysis was coming from me. Not from the company. Not from Harrison. From me. She read it that night. She called me the next morning. "Chloe, I need to talk to you about something," Cassandra said. "I can't talk at work," I said. "The situation is complicated." We agreed to meet for coffee that Saturday. I knew what this conversation was about. I'd been expecting it. She was going to try to figure out if I was going to stay or leave. She was going to try to understand what was happening with my relationship to the company. And she was going to make a decision about whether she could trust me long term. That conversation was going to determine everything. Saturday morning, I sat across from Cassandra in a coffee shop near my apartment. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "What happened with the contract?" she asked. I told her the truth. I told her that Harrison had reassigned the account. I told her that I understood it was a business decision. What I didn't do was criticize Harrison. What I didn't do was complain. What I did do was listen to her concerns. And I heard something crucial in what she said. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about her account. She was worried about whether she was going to get the same level of service. She was worried about whether she could trust the company anymore. "I want to be honest with you," Cassandra said. "You've been the only person at your company that I've actually trusted. And now that you're not running the account, I'm concerned." I looked at her directly. "Then you should be concerned," I said. "But I want you to understand something. That doesn't change who I am. And it doesn't change what I can offer." That's when I made my move. I pulled out a proposal. Not for her to sign. Not for her to commit to anything. But a proposal for a direct consulting relationship. I laid out exactly what I would provide. I explained that I could do this independently. That I didn't need the company to deliver value to her. That I could set up a structure where she got the same level of service, the same level of attention, the same level of expertise. Without the middleman. She read through it carefully. "You do this separately?" she asked. "I can do this any way you want me to do it," I said. But yes, if that's what you need, I can do this independently. That was the moment everything shifted. That was the moment Cassandra understood that I wasn't her vendor. I was her partner. And I had just offered her the ability to work with me directly. I need to talk to my board, Cassandra said. I'll call you Tuesday. She did call me Tuesday. And she said something that changed everything. We want you to come in and pitch directly to our investors. We want to show them the Meridian account with you as the lead consultant. I went to that meeting on Wednesday. I was nervous. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew this meeting was the point of no return. Once I walked into that boardroom and pitched to Meridian's investors, I was done being invisible. Once they saw what I could actually do, once they understood the value I brought, there was no going back to just being an employee working for someone who didn't appreciate me. I brought a presentation. Not a sales pitch. A strategic analysis of what Meridian could accomplish with proper operational restructuring. I showed them exactly where they were losing money. Exactly where they were inefficient. Exactly what a proper optimization plan would save them. I showed them that I understood their business better than anyone at my company ever would. When I finished, the room was silent. Then one of the investors spoke. How much would it cost to have you do this work directly? I quoted a number. It was significant. It was more than I was making at the company. But it was also reasonable for the value I was delivering. The investors looked at each other. Then Cassandra smiled. We'd like to hire you as an independent contractor, she said. Starting immediately. 6-month engagement. Full strategic oversight of the account restructuring. I said yes. I said yes without hesitation. I said yes knowing that this meant I was burning my bridge with the company. I said yes knowing that Harrison was going to find out and he was going to be furious. But I also knew something else. I knew that what I was doing was completely legal. I knew that I wasn't stealing anything. I wasn't violating any contracts. I was simply offering my skills to a client who valued me. And I knew that Meridian was going to get better results through this arrangement than they would have gotten through the company. I didn't resign immediately. That was deliberate. I went back to the company. I kept doing my job. I was professional. I was pleasant. And for the next 2 weeks, I worked on the Meridian account from my home in the evenings. I consulted for them. I provided strategic guidance. I started implementing the restructuring plan. I did this while I was still technically employed by the company. And I documented everything. Because I knew what was about to happen. I knew that Harrison was going to find out. And when he did, things were going to get very ugly. So I made sure that I had a complete record of everything I'd done for Meridian. Everything that the company had failed to deliver. Everything that showed why Meridian had chosen to work with me independently. Harrison found out on a Friday. One of Meridian's team members accidentally mentioned something about working with Chloe's new setup on a call with Harrison's team. I watched Harrison's face when he realized what had happened. He came into my office. He was furious. He told me that I was violating company policy. He told me that I was stealing clients. He told me that I was in breach of my employment contract. I listened to him. I was calm. And then I asked him a very simple question. Which contract am I in breach of? He didn't have an answer. Because I hadn't violated any contract. I'd left the company's employee with appropriate notice. I'd started an independent consulting business. I'd taken no proprietary information. I'd taken no trade secrets. I'd simply worked with a client who wanted to work with me. That was completely legal. He tried to fire me on the spot. But I'd already tendered my resignation that morning. I handed him a formal letter. 2 weeks' notice. Professional. Clean. He turned purple. He screamed about betrayal and disloyalty. But none of it mattered. I was already gone. I spent my last 2 weeks at the company being completely professional. I wrapped up all my remaining work. I transferred everything to the appropriate people. I didn't trash talk anyone. I didn't complain. I just did my job and counted down the days. What I was doing in the evenings was completely different. I was consulting for Meridian. I was implementing that restructuring plan. I was showing them exactly what I could accomplish when I had full authority and their full support. By the time my 2 weeks were up, Meridian had already realized the value of having me as their independent contractor. They'd already seen the improvements in their operations. They'd already understood that this was one of the best decisions they could have made. The day after I left the company, I got a very interesting email. It was from someone in Meridian's legal department. They were asking me some detailed questions about my transition from the company. Specifically, they were asking whether I had any documentation about the account management. Whether I had records of the work I'd done prior to Harrison taking over. I sent them everything. I sent them the complete file. The emails. The proposals. The strategy documents. Everything that showed the work I'd done. Everything that showed how I'd built the relationship that the company had then stolen. I didn't tell them why I was sending this. I just sent it. They asked a few follow-up questions. And then they told me something that changed everything. We're having an audit, the Meridian legal team told me. Just routine. But we want to make sure all of the work that was done on the account is properly documented. We want to understand the timeline. We want to understand who did what. I explained the timeline. I explained that I'd built the account from scratch. I explained that I'd spent 6 months developing the relationship and creating the strategy. I explained that Harrison had taken over the account in week 7. I explained that his team had missed deadlines and deliverables. I explained that I'd been brought back in as an independent contractor to fix the problems. It was all factual. It was all documented. What I didn't know was that this routine audit was actually something much more serious. What I didn't know was that Meridian's investors had started asking questions about the company I worked for. What I didn't know was that those questions had started a trail that was leading directly to federal investigators. 3 weeks after I left the company, I got a phone call from a woman who identified herself as Special Agent Morrison with the FBI. She was calling about my former employer. She was asking questions about account management practices. She was asking whether I had any documentation of irregular business practices. She was asking whether I had records of client accounts being reassigned without proper justification. I answered all of her questions. I sent her everything I had. The documentation. The emails. The proposals. Everything. Because I wasn't trying to hide anything. I was simply telling the truth. What I learned from that conversation was that my former company had been under investigation for several months. Not just for what happened with my account, but for a pattern of mismanagement. A pattern of falsifying client relationships. A pattern of overbilling. The audit that Meridian had requested had actually triggered a federal inquiry. And my documentation had become evidence in that inquiry. The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, I focused on my consulting work with Meridian. I implemented the restructuring plan. I helped them optimize their operations. I saved them millions in inefficiencies. I was too busy to think about what was happening with the FBI. And frankly, I didn't really care. I was done with that company. I was done with Harrison. I was focused on building something better. That's where my energy was. That's where it should have been. But the investigation was still happening. And it was leading somewhere very specific. 6 weeks after the investigation started, federal agents walked into my former company's offices. They executed a search warrant. They seized documents. They conducted interviews. The charge was fraud. Specifically, they were investigating whether the company had been systematically overbilling clients for work that hadn't been done properly. Whether they'd been reassigning accounts without disclosure. Whether they'd been falsifying billing records. Harrison was directly implicated. The company's owner was directly implicated. And the evidence that tied it all together was the documentation I'd provided. The emails showing the timeline. The proposals showing the work I'd done. The records showing that Harrison had taken credit for work he hadn't done. The billing records showing that they'd billed Meridian for work that wasn't completed to standard. I found out about the arrest from a news article. The headline was straightforward: local business owner charged with fraud. They didn't name Harrison specifically in the article. But I knew it was him. I knew what had happened. He'd been charged with wire fraud and falsifying business records. The company was facing federal charges. And it was all because of the documentation. Because I'd kept meticulous records. Because I'd documented the timeline. Because I hadn't let his theft of my work slide. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel satisfied. I just felt like justice had actually worked. That fraud had been uncovered. That the system had actually caught someone who deserved to be caught. My consulting contract with Meridian turned into a permanent position. Not an employee. An independent contractor. But permanent. Ongoing. Stable. They tripled my consulting fee based on the results I'd delivered. They gave me complete autonomy over the account. They treated me like what I actually was, which was a partner, not a vendor. I built a team around me. I brought in people I'd worked with before. People who understood what quality looked like. People who understood what it meant to actually deliver value. Within 6 months, I'd gone from being someone's invisible employee to running my own consulting firm with Meridian as my anchor client. Harrison was convicted. Wire fraud. Falsifying business records. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. And he'd done it all to himself. Not because I'd sabotaged him. Not because I'd betrayed him. But because I'd documented what he'd actually done. And I'd let the system work. His company imploded. The owner sold it to pay legal fees and settlements. Most of the staff found new jobs. The company that had thrived on mediocrity and theft didn't survive under federal scrutiny. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I didn't send Harrison a message or anything petty like that. I just moved forward. I built my consulting practice. I expanded it. I brought on other clients. I became known in my industry as someone who delivered. Someone who understood operations. Someone who could fix broken systems and build better ones. Meridian recommended me to other companies. Those companies became clients. Within a year, I had 4 major accounts. Within 2 years, I had 8. I was more successful as an independent consultant than I ever would have been as someone's invisible employee. That was the real victory. Not that Harrison went to prison. Not that the company failed. But that I'd built something better for myself. Looking back, I understand what happened. I was betrayed. My work was stolen. My contribution was erased. And in the moment, it felt like the end of the world. But it was actually the beginning of something much better. It forced me to stop accepting invisibility. It forced me to stop relying on someone else's recognition. It forced me to build my own value and my own reputation independently. And it taught me something crucial that everyone needs to learn. Documentation matters. Relationships matter. Trust matters more than any title. And competence, when paired with patience and strategy, always wins. Harrison thought he could steal my work and get away with it. He thought that his position and his authority would protect him. But all he did was expose himself to the consequences of his own fraud. I didn't destroy him. He destroyed himself. I just documented the evidence that proved it. Kindly like, share, and subscribe for more intriguing stories coming your way. The end.